Okay, what I've talked to Mr. Frisbee about was his request is that the city consider a resolution or something. And before we asked the city staff to prepare such a thing, which would cost staff time, I wanted to make sure the council was on board with doing it, or if they had a problem with it, we need to have that discussion this evening, because I presume the next step that Mr. Frisbee would like to recommend is that we ask the city administrator to craft a resolution based on some of the samples that he's received. But I don't want to presume that the council is interested in doing this. The issue, this isn't an issue that's typically comes before a city of our size particularly. We typically deal with issues that directly relate to operations of and citizens, and I know that certainly the effort or the argument can be made that this directly affects all citizens, but again, there are a number of national issues that are going on that the city of Merriam is not going to be involved in. So that's not part of what we typically do. So I don't want to assume anything, and I'd like to hear from the council if there's any thoughts about whether this needs to go to the next step in having the city draft a resolution for us to consider and have probably discussion, I would say, more at that point, because we wouldn't know what to discuss when since we don't have it in front of us. Some of this information is relatively new. So, Mr. Knapp, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I have a problem with this. I want to disagree with Councilmember Frisbee. I don't think this is a nonpartisan issue. I think this is a highly contested partisan issue. This is a nonpartisan body, and I don't think this is the time or the place to discuss these matters, because it is a partisan issue.
I would have to disagree with that. The citizens of Merriam are going to be affected by this climate change, as they have already, with the flooding in '93, I think it was, where I looked down on the bridge at Johnson Drive Bridge, and it was completely filled with water over the top. There have been other instances, like in Houston today, they are in like 2-3 feet of water. So it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time where we just overflow.
Speaking politically, do you know that do all 11,000 citizens of Merriam support this?
I can't answer that.
Right, that's the point.
And I can certainly understand what you're saying. I don't want to speak for anyone. I think what Mr. Knapp is trying to say that in our two-party structure, there is one party that's overwhelmingly in support of this and one party that's not. And that's what makes it partisan on a national level. One of the issues that I see, and I've done a study of the makeup of our voters in terms of their political affiliation. I think, I can't remember the exact percentages, maybe some of you that are running for office might know this, but I know that right now in Merriam, we may have a majority of Democrats. It's not a very large majority, it's like 51% or 52%, but that's pretty close. But my point is half of our city is Democrat, half of our city affiliates with Republican. And this may be a Democrat and Republican issue. I know it shouldn't be because it's a world issue, but in the reality of life, it's certainly going to be debated politically by people that have nothing to do with the city of Merriam. I think that's what you were trying to allude to, Ted, perhaps.
My rebuttal is that we're talking about science now. We're not talking about politics. This is scientifically valid. I know some of you might disagree with that, but it's scientifically valid. Therefore, it's nonpartisan.
But a resolution is political. That's my point.
Good, sir.
I actually have 2 points. I was listening to Minnesota Public Radio this morning where they actually did an entire story about how this is not a partisan issue, and that they actually had national leadership audio on there where both parties were in full agreement that climate change was an issue. I wish I could remember the exact time and what program it was where they just spoke about that. The other point I wanted to make is I believe Al and I believe candidate Whitney have mentioned that if mayors and cities all pass resolutions like this, we can actually fulfill the Paris Climate Agreement without actually needing the federal government to help us with that. So it is an issue that we can change from the bottom up.
I think one of the, obviously it's really important that local government functions in a way that is collaborative. This is one of those strange issues where some folks seem to think it's very political. Just from a personal standpoint, I started my career in the fossil fuel as a petroleum engineer, and so I understand kind of from a number of different standpoints. But I also have been around enough to watch significant changes in the Kansas City area in the 30 years I've been here. We used to have my ex-in-laws had a home on a small lake in Raytown, and used to ice over. We used to be able to go skating. That hasn't happened in 20 years. The property that I'm involved with here, and I also have some interest in farm property, we've had substantial, much significant rainfall and weather events over the last 10 years. And honestly, this year, I've had thousands of dollars worth of damage at both places due to 9 inches of rain in 24 hours in one place. So, but there are things that we can do at a local level, such as, we're talking about, I don't know about the carbon tax or that sort of thing, but there are things that a local community can do to help with carbon sequestration. Trees, as was brought up earlier, take carbon out of the atmosphere. So there are things, small things at least, that we can do, potentially look at to try to help take some carbon out of whoever caused it. That's really not the issue. The issue is that we clearly have significantly rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that if we can remove them will help. So I certainly think it might be worthwhile looking at something.
Just to put in my 2 cents on that, I totally agree with you. But this particular idea is supported with carbon fee and dividends back to the public, is supported by the economists all over the place. This is the one thing that we think can bring, that can bring it down 40% by 2030. So that's saying something.
I'm curious, what would be the mechanism? You know, the answer.
That I'd like Dr. Brown to talk about.
What would be the mechanism in terms of how corporations would be forced to pay these dividends? How would that occur?
Should I step up or?
Sure, please.
So this is basically, if you think about the cigarette tax, how when at one point we were, we had so many smokers, and the cost of dealing with their diseases, their emphysema and their lung cancer, wasn't just borne by them, it was borne on all of us. It made Medicare go up. It was unfair to the public. So those, the costs for that needed to be internalized.